The first thing you notice is the smell. Not popcorn, not fairy floss, but burning plastic. It crawls into your throat before you understand what it means. Inside the ghost train, children laugh too loudly, trying to be braver than they feel. The walls are painted with monsters that never move, cardboard demons that look cheap in the dim light. But then the lights flicker and something changes. The heat builds. The air thickens. A child coughs, then another. You hear someone whisper, "Is this part of the ride?" But the fire doesn't wait for an answer. It rushes through the tunnel, hissing, cracking, devouring the wooden bones of the building. The monsters on the walls curl into ash, their grins melting. Children pound their fists against the walls, but there are no exits, no hidden doors. The ride was meant to frighten them, but not like this. The painted devils are replaced by a real one, made of flame. Outside, the screams rise above the carnival music, twisting it into something grotesque. Parents run toward the smoke, but the ride is already sealed. The heat is unbearable. The air is unbreathable. Sydney, June 9th, 1979. Luna Park, the night the ghost train burned. 7 dead, most of them children. The official report would call it an accident, but some survivors swore they smelled fuel. Witnesses claimed they saw men acting strange near the ride before the fire, and others said something more chilling, that the devil himself was seen walking the fairgrounds that night. Accident or arson? The truth is buried under ash, and Sydney has never stopped choking on the smoke.
Welcome to Nightmare Crimes, where every story blurs the line between fact and fear. Some say they're true, others hope they're not. We don't decide, you do. Subscribe and step into the unknown.
Before the smoke, before the sirens, there was laughter. Luna Park lived on that sound. Neon lights hummed in the winter air, buzzing like restless insects above a sea of families who wanted only a Saturday night out. Fathers handed over crumpled bills. Mothers clutched handbags against their sides. Children tugged at sleeves and pointed to the rides that promised terror but delivered only fun. The air was heavy with sugar and oil, hot dogs sweating on their metal rollers, fairy floss sticking to every small, greedy hand. The Ferris wheel spun like a lazy coin in the sky, and the merry-go-round sang its endless tune. The ghost train stood apart from the others. Not grand, not modern, not safe. A relic made of plywood and black paint. Its mouth yawned wide, a crude demon face carved above the entrance, eyes glowing with weak bulbs that sometimes blinked out altogether. The tunnel inside was narrow, the ceiling low. The wooden tracks rattled beneath small carts that creaked with every turn. Inside, papier-mâché skeletons and fake cobwebs tried their best to scare. The illusion worked only on the youngest. The older children rolled their eyes, too brave for fake monsters. But still, the ride drew them in. Because the darkness inside was real. Parents leaned against fences, smoking cigarettes and watching the river of strangers wash past. A busker juggled knives that flashed silver under the lights. A group of boys kicked at the gravel, daring one another to ride the ghost train, laughing the sharp, bright laugh of those who never think of consequences. The park was alive, but under the noise was something quieter, a vibration no one could name. The bulbs above the ghost train flickered again, and for a moment the demon face at its entrance looked less like painted wood and more like a warning. Something waited inside, patient as fire. The carts rattled forward into the mouth of the ghost train. Wood on iron, a slow screech, the kind of sound you ignored in the 1970s because things were always a little broken. A boy laughed nervously as his cart dipped into the darkness. Behind him, another family followed. The children pressed close, their parents smiling the tired smiles of people who wanted a brief reprieve. The tunnel swallowed them whole. Black walls, cheap paint still sticky in places, papier-mâché monsters jerking from wires. A skeleton lunged forward on a spring. A rubber bat swooped. The children screamed and then laughed at themselves. The mothers clutched their handbags tighter, pretending fear for their children's sake. And then, something new. A curl of gray smoke that didn't belong to the show. It snaked through the darkness, subtle at first, almost theatrical. The riders didn't react. A father pointed to it and whispered, "Good effect." His daughter giggled, relieved. The smoke thickened. It moved in slow drifts across the track, clinging to the cart wheels. The smell came next, acrid, chemical, biting at the back of the throat. It was nothing like stage smoke. The riders coughed, looked around uneasily. The skeletons and cobwebs no longer seemed silly. They seemed like set dressing for something worse. From outside, the mothers waiting for their children saw the first thin plume rising from the slats of the wooden structure. At first it looked like fog rolling over the water, harmless, even pretty against the neon glow. Then it grew darker, blacker. Inside, a child cried, "It's hot." The cart turned a corner and the riders saw it. Flames licking at the plywood walls, crawling fast, greedy. The fire moved as if it had been waiting for air. The ride's decorations became instant fuel. A painted ghoul burst into sparks, its face collapsing into ash. Panic cracked through the darkness. A father stood in his cart, pounding at the wooden paneling, shouting for a way out. The cart jolted, threatening to tip. Children screamed, high and sharp. One boy tried to jump, but the narrow track trapped him between fire on one side and painted wall on the other. Outside, the mothers began to scream. Not playful shrieks, not the laughter of rides and games. These were raw, animal screams that made the whole park turn its head. They clawed at the entrance, calling the names of their children. The fathers didn't hesitate. Some pushed past attendants, some broke through the cheap barricades, charging into the smoke-filled tunnel. They stumbled blindly, shouting for their sons and daughters, their voices cracking with fear. The flames spread faster than anyone expected. Dry timber, paint, fabric, everything burned. The tunnel became a furnace. The painted demon face above the entrance glowed in the firelight as if it grinned at what it had birthed. From the far side, a cart emerged, its passengers half standing, choking, covered in soot. They staggered into the open air. A boy collapsed, coughing so hard his chest rattled. Behind them, the next cart never appeared. Only fire. The park was chaos now. Attendants shouted for order, but no one listened. The sky above Luna Park filled with black smoke that carried the smell of burning wood, burning plastic, burning flesh. Parents wept and clutched their children who had escaped, searching desperately for the ones who had not. Some of the children never came back. Their last screams were swallowed by the ride, by the fire that moved too fast, too hungry. Sydney, June 9th, 1979. Luna Park, 7 dead, and no one agrees on why. The fire trucks arrived too late to save the ghost train. By the time the first hoses cut through the night air, the ride was already a black skeleton, its walls sagging, its roof collapsed into glowing embers. Water hissed against the flames, turning the air into steam thick enough to sting the skin. The crowd pressed forward despite the heat, desperate for answers, desperate for names. The firefighters moved inside, their boots crunching on ash, beams collapsing around them. They dragged the first body out before midnight. A man, his arms locked in rigor around two boys. His face charred but unmistakable in its final gesture. He had died holding them, trying to shield them even as the fire consumed all three. The crowd sobbed. Some turned away. Others stared, frozen, as if they could not believe the amusement park they had brought their children to was now a morgue. One by one, the bodies followed. Small forms wrapped hastily in sheets, their shapes betraying their age. 6 boys in total, their mothers screaming each time a new bundle was carried past. The sound did not stop. It rose and fell in waves, raw and unbearable. Survivors who had stumbled out of the smoke clung to police officers, babbling their stories. They spoke of how the flames leapt without warning, how the fire moved too fast for wood and pain alone. Some swore they smelled something sharp and chemical in the air, like petrol. Others described the way the fire seemed to chase them, surging ahead as if it knew where they were running. A girl, no more than 12, whispered through cracked lips. It wasn't normal. It didn't burn right. The fire chief walked the perimeter, his face hard. He bent down, touched the soaked soil, then raised his hand to his nose. The sharp tang clung there, unmistakable. An accelerant, petrol or something close. It explained the speed, the way the flames had devoured the ride in minutes. But who would set fire to a ride packed with children? And why? The reporters were already circling, their cameras snapping, their questions shouted over the chaos. Police officers tried to keep them back, but the words slipped through the crowd like poison. Accident, arson, negligence, murder. No one agreed on the truth. Some wanted to blame the park's shoddy construction, the plywood walls, the lack of safety measures. Others whispered about a man seen earlier, a man in a demonic mask who had slipped into the ghost train before the fire began and never emerged. The bodies kept coming. The smoke kept rising. And Sydney went to bed that night knowing Luna Park would never be the same. 7 dead, 6 of them children. One father who died trying to hold back the flames. And still the question hung in the air, heavier than the smoke. Was this a tragedy of chance, or something much darker? By morning, the newspapers had their headlines. Tragedy at Luna Park. 7 dead in fire. Electrical fault to blame. The police commissioner stood before the cameras with the same tired phrases the city had heard before. Faulty wiring. Old construction. Nothing suspicious. He reassured parents that Sydney's beloved amusement park would rebuild, that the community had nothing to fear. But the crowd at the press conference did not clap. They watched in silence, their faces pale, their eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Because those who had been there the night before knew better. Electrical faults don't make fire climb walls like a living thing. They don't ignite plywood tunnels in seconds. They don't spread with the ferocity of accelerant-fed flames. Survivors had whispered this to anyone who would listen. Firefighters had smelled it too, the sharp tang of petrol cutting through smoke. One boy who made it out alive swore he saw men near the ride before the fire began, men carrying cans. He said they vanished into the shadows when the flames erupted. Police never followed up. His statement was never included in the final report. The official story became fact overnight. 7 lives lost because of a tragic accident, nothing more. But in the corners of Sydney, in pubs, in kitchens, and in schoolyards, another story spread. Parents spoke of how quickly the ride burned. Fire experts muttered about accelerants. And children whispered about the man in the mask seen slipping inside the ghost train before the first spark. The truth was splitting into 2 versions. The clean, polished story of a government eager to bury the horror. And the raw, jagged version told by survivors, thick with suspicion, horror, and betrayal. It was no longer a simple fire. It was a true crime mystery. An unsolved case buried under bureaucracy. An event whispered about as arson cloaked as accident. The kind of urban legend that makes its way into every crime forum, every horror channel, every late-night conspiracy conversation. The official report said Luna Park's ghost train died because of faulty wiring. But the survivors knew better. They had smelled the truth. And the truth reeked of petrol. Sydney in the late 1970s was not the glossy postcard city you see today. Behind the opera house and beaches, the real city pulsed in shadows. A city where the Sydney underworld moved money, drugs, and favors through politicians like pawns. At the center was a man whose name still stirs unease, Abe Saffron. Known as Mr. Sin, Saffron's empire stretched across brothels, nightclubs, and real estate. He didn't need guns or threats. He had leverage. He bought silence with cash, influence with fear. Everyone knew his reach extended into government offices, police stations, even church pews. And Luna Park? That wasn't simply a carnival by the harbor. It was prime land. The amusement park sat on Sydney's most desirable waterfront, a jewel every developer wanted. But there was a problem. Luna Park was protected, a heritage landmark beloved by families. Until the fire. 7 lives gone, the ghost train reduced to ash, and suddenly the park's future was uncertain. Developers circled like vultures. Whispers spread that the blaze had been more than tragedy. It was an opportunity, an arson-for-profit scheme dressed up as an accident. True crime investigators point to Saffron's history. Nightclubs he wanted mysteriously burned. Hotels tied to rivals went up in flames. Every fire seemed to profit him. Every fire erased an obstacle. And in 1979, Luna Park became the biggest fire of them all. Police, quick to declare faulty wiring, ignored the rumors of men with cans near the ghost train. They ignored survivors who swore they saw suspicious figures that night. They ignored the firefighters who smelled accelerant. Instead, the case was closed. The deeper you look, the darker it gets. Organized crime links, political cover-up, land development greed. The fingerprints of Sydney's most powerful figures seemed everywhere. The official story of an electrical fault was tidy, safe, and reassuring. But the whispers spoke of a chilling conspiracy, of the Sydney Mafia-style syndicate cleaning the slate with fire. And in those whispers, one name kept rising again and again, Abe Saffron. The deeper investigators dug, the more the trail dissolved into silence. Documents vanished from police archives. Statements from survivors were quietly misplaced. Files that should have survived for decades were reduced to fragments or declared missing. It was as if someone had taken a match to the evidence, the same way fire had taken the ghost train. Witnesses spoke of intimidation. A mother who saw 2 men with fuel cans was later told she must have been mistaken. A firefighter who reported the unmistakable smell of accelerant was warned not to repeat it publicly. The ones who pushed harder found themselves stonewalled by authorities, dismissed as grieving relatives too consumed by pain to think clearly. Then came the official inquests. In courtrooms dressed as theaters of truth, the verdict was simple and final: electrical fault. No conspiracy, no arson, no organized crime, no corrupt politician pulling strings. But the families refused to accept it. They had seen their children run into that ride, and they had seen how fast the fire consumed everything. They knew faulty wiring could not explain an inferno that burned hotter and faster than natural fires should. They knew something darker was at work. For decades they fought, writing letters, filing appeals, demanding fresh hearings. Each attempt met the same cold response. The case was closed, the tragedy explained. Every request for justice buried under bureaucracy. The parents carried the truth like a wound that never closed. They whispered that the real evidence had been destroyed with the children, buried under the rubble of the ghost train and in the vaults of Sydney's power. The story stopped being about grief alone. It became about systemic corruption, about how governments erase history when it threatens the wrong people. And in the true crime world, few cases feel as suffocating as this one, where the flames consumed not only lives, but also the truth. The Luna Park fire became a cold case conspiracy, a horror story not only of 7 deaths, but of a city that chose silence over justice. When Luna Park reopened, it looked polished, repainted, and rebuilt. Bright lights flickered across the harbor again. Children pressed against ticket booths. Laughter returned. But beneath the surface, something remained broken. Staff whispered of strange sounds when the gates closed. Workers on night shifts reported hearing the faint cries of children drifting from the direction of the old ghost train site, long after the crowd was gone. Some swore they smelled smoke, though no fire burned. Others spoke of doors rattling on their own, or shadows that didn't belong. Survivors of the 1979 inferno carried their scars into adulthood. Mothers described waking in the night to the sound of screaming sons who were no longer alive. Fathers avoided the harbor altogether, unable to walk near the amusement park that had taken everything from them. The tragedy never loosened its grip. Locals say if you stand near the old ghost train site on a quiet night, you hear it too, the screams. High-pitched, panicked, echoing through the dark. Some visitors have claimed they saw a figure in a mask, standing just beyond the lights, watching silently before vanishing. What happened at Luna Park was not only a crime of fire and politics. It became one of Australia's most chilling haunted stories. The burned souls of 7 lives seemed to linger, bound to the place where innocence had been reduced to ash. The ride was rebuilt, families returned, and politicians smiled for cameras. But beneath the glossy surface of the reopened amusement park, there is a lingering horror, a reminder that some tragedies never end. Luna Park was alive again, but it was never the same. Sydney, June 9, 1979. 7 people gone in less than 15 minutes. 6 children and a father who tried to save them. The fire reduced the ghost train to ashes, but the truth never surfaced. The official record stamped the words "electrical fault." Case closed. The government reassured the public. The police moved on. Yet survivors and families never accepted that answer. Flames that violent do not rise from faulty wires alone. Witnesses saw men with fuel cans. Rumors of organized crime, political corruption, and development deals refused to fade. No one was convicted. No justice was delivered. The files remain marked by silence, and the ashes carry more secrets than the city has ever admitted. So what was it? A tragic accident in a rundown amusement ride? Or deliberate arson? A crime engineered in the shadows of Sydney's underworld? The answer may have burned with the ghost train itself. 7 lives ended inside the ride. Officially, it was tragedy. Unofficially, it became one of Australia's darkest true crime mysteries, a fire wrapped in smoke, silence, and fear. And even today, if you stand near Luna Park after midnight, some say you still hear them, the screams trapped in the dark. The story ends here, but the question doesn't. And maybe that is the most haunting part.